The rain fell in sheets against the glass of the 46th floor, blurring the neon signs of New Orleans into a watercolor dream of electric blues and feverish reds. Below, the city was a living, breathing thing, its pulse a distant, moody jazz riff carried on the wind. Inside, the restaurant was a bubble of hushed elegance, a world away from the grit of the streets I knew, a world I had no business being in. Every clink of silverware, every murmured conversation felt amplified. The air was thick with the scent of money and power, a perfume I found suffocating. My own reflection stared back at me from the window, a woman in a borrowed dress, a paramedic playing a part she hadn't auditioned for. And then I felt it, the familiar burn behind my eyes, the traitorous welling of a single tear. I angled my head, pretending to admire the storm, and swiped it away with a knuckle before it could fall. A mistake. The soft scrape of a silver fork against porcelain cut through the room's ambient noise. It was a small sound, but it landed with the finality of a gavel. Across the table, Cassian Vale placed his fork and knife neatly beside his plate, his meal of seared scallops untouched. He hadn't been looking at me. Not directly, but he saw everything. He always did. His eyes, the color of storm clouds over the Gulf, found mine. They were calm, analytical, and held a chilling stillness. When he spoke, his voice was a low baritone, a smooth, dark current that could pull you under before you even realized you were drowning. "Dinner's not over," he said, the words perfectly spaced, each one a chip of ice, "until you tell me why you cried." The subtle choreography of his world began. To my left, Roe, a mountain of a man in a tailored suit, shifted his weight, his hand disappearing inside his jacket. Silas, leaner and sharper, adjusted his tie, his gaze sweeping the room with a predator's casual vigilance. And June, the woman who moved with the silent grace of a shadow, simply tilted her head, her focus locking onto the exit. It was seamless, practiced, a silent, lethal ballet. As if on cue, our waiter, who'd been hovering nearby, evaporated. The other patrons seemed to shrink in their seats, their laughter and chatter dying into a respectful, fearful silence. The entire restaurant, 46 floors above the rain-slicked streets, became our private stage. The air didn't just chill, it froze solid. My hand, resting in my lap, instinctively tightened into a fist, inside the small, hidden pocket sewn into the lining of my dress. My fingers brushed against the cool, familiar shape of the titanium key. Jax's key, a promise, a memory, the only piece of my brother I had left, the reason I was sitting here, across from a man who ruled the city's underbelly. The afternoon replayed in my mind, a frantic, adrenaline-soaked blur, the screech of the ambulance, the acrid smell of smoke from the port explosion, a man bleeding out on my gurney, his eyes wide with a desperate urgency. He'd pressed the small, encrypted USB into my palm, his fingers surprisingly strong. "Don't trust Rook Consortium," he'd rasped, his breath catching on a tide of blood. "Jax, they have Jax." And then, just an hour before this dinner, the anonymous text had buzzed against my hip. "FCA is coming for you. Don't be alone." The Federal Commerce Authority, a name that meant nothing to me until the man on my gurney had linked it to Rook. Suddenly, I wasn't just a paramedic who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was a loose end, a witness, a target. "Your hands are trembling. Lyra." Cassian's voice pulled me back to the present. He wasn't looking at my hands. His gaze was fixed on my face, dissecting every flicker of my eyelashes, every minute tightening of the muscles around my jaw. He wasn't just looking at me. He was reading me, scanning for tells, for the slightest crack in my composure. It was the same look he'd given me the day we met, when my ambulance had been the first on the scene of a business dispute of his. I had saved one of his men. He had noticed, and he had not forgotten. I needed to give him something, a piece of the truth, wrapped in a lie. It was a dangerous game, but it was the only one I had. I took a shallow breath, letting my shoulders slump just enough to sell it. "I'm sorry," I murmured, my voice a little shaky. I hoped it sounded genuine. It was a rough shift. We lost a patient, a bad one. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of calculation. He knew. Of course, he knew. In Cashin Vale's city, information was a currency more valuable than gold, and he was the Federal Reserve. He probably knew the patient's name, his blood type, and what he'd eaten for breakfast. He leaned forward slightly, the movement minimal but commanding. The dock worker from the explosion, John Doe, case number 734, pronounced dead at 3:09 p.m. I'm aware. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air between us. He hadn't just become aware. He'd sought out the information. He had connections inside the Metropolitan Integrity Bureau, a fact the entire city whispered about. He had bought my patient's file. What I'm not aware of, he continued, his voice dropping even lower, is why the encrypted drive he gave you matches the manifest of a stolen shipment from the Marigny docks this morning. My blood ran cold. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. He knew about the USB. He knew everything, the pretense. The carefully constructed walls I had built around myself, crumbled to dust. I was exposed, caught in the unblinking gaze of a man who missed nothing. This wasn't a dinner, it was an interrogation, and I had just failed the first question. Panic was a wild animal clawing at the inside of my chest. I could lie, deny everything, but he would see it. He would hear it in the frantic rhythm of my heart. I had one move left, not a defense, but a counterattack, a desperate, all-or-nothing gamble. My trembling fingers retrieved the small USB from its hiding place. I placed it on the pristine white tablecloth, right between his plate and mine. The tiny piece of plastic and metal felt like a grenade with the pin pulled. "You want to know what's on it?" I challenged, my voice stronger than I felt. "Then let's find out. Together." His eyes flickered down to the drive, then back to my face. A slow, dangerous smile touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a smile of warmth or humor. It was the smile of a predator who appreciated a worthy struggle. At that exact moment, a deafening crack of thunder shook the building to its foundations. The lights in the restaurant flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the room into near total darkness, save for the ghostly glow of the city below. A collective gasp went through the room, but before anyone could react, I saw it. A tiny, perfect circle of brilliant red light dancing on the rain-streaked window pane right beside Cassian's head, a laser sight. I didn't even have time to scream. In a movement so fast it was a blur, Cassian was out of his chair, an arm like a steel band wrapped around my waist, yanking me off my feet and onto the floor. He twisted his body, covering mine as we fell, the hard planes of his chest a shield against the world. The scent of him filled my senses clean. Expensive soap, night rain, and the faint, warm smell of oak. The window imploded. The sound was a concussive boom, a roar of shattering glass that drowned out the storm. I flinched, burying my face against his shoulder as he tightened his grip, his hand coming up to cup the back of my head, pressing me down, keeping me safe. Above us, another sound erupted, a sharp, controlled series of cracks. June. She was returning fire, her weapons report a stark contrast to the chaotic spray of the attack. The panic I'd been holding at bay broke free, a raw, primal terror that threatened to swallow me whole. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against his own steady, powerful rhythm. He held me there, a solid, immovable anchor in the storm of violence, his body a fortress. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. Emergency lights flickered on, casting the room in an eerie, sterile glow. The other patrons were huddled under tables, their faces pale with shock. Shards of safety glass littered the floor like diamonds. June stood by the shattered window, weapon lowered, a calm, deadly sentinel. Cassian released me, moving with an unnerving fluidity. He stood, brushing glass from his jacket as if it were lint. His eyes scanned the chaos. Cold and assessing, he was no longer a dinner companion. He was a commander on a battlefield. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable. He extended a hand, I took it, and he pulled me to my feet. His grip was firm, impersonal. "Leave the table," he commanded, his voice cutting through the lingering shock in the room. He wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to his men. "Take her to Vesper Tower." My mind reeled. Vesper Tower, his fortress, his home. This wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. The dinner was over, but something far more dangerous had just begun. He started toward the exit, expecting me to follow. I stood frozen for a second, my throat tight. I had to know. "Cassian," I said, his name a choked whisper. He stopped, turning his head just enough to look at me over his shoulder. "If I tell you everything?" I asked, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Everything about my brother, about Rook, about this. Will you believe me?" He turned fully to face me then. The emergency lights carved sharp shadows across his face, making him look like something sculpted from granite in secrets. "I only trust two things. Lyra," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth, "evidence, and the rhythm of your heartbeat when you lie." He turned and walked away. Silas fell into step behind me, a silent, imposing presence. He gently guided me forward, his hand not quite touching my back. I followed Cassian, my legs unsteady. As we stepped into the private elevator, the doors sliding shut with a quiet, final hiss. I looked back at the ruined dinner table, the spilled wine, the shattered glass, the forgotten USB drive. Our dinner wasn't over. It had simply changed venues. The main course was no longer scallops and wine. It was survival, and I was the one on the menu. The elevator ascended in unnerving silence, a smooth, frictionless climb into the heart of Cassian's empire. Vesper Tower was less a building and more a statement, a shard of smoked glass and black steel that pierced the New Orleans skyline. We didn't stop at a penthouse suite. The elevator opened directly into a room that felt like the inside of a vault. The walls were covered in dark, acoustic paneling. The air was cool and still, and the only furniture was a single chair and a console desk holding a sleek, black computer that was clearly not connected to anything else, the listening room. The silence here was absolute, a manufactured void designed to capture the faintest whisper of truth. Cassian didn't say a word. He walked to the console, took the USB drive from his pocket, and slid it into a port. His movements were economical and precise. He was a surgeon in his own operating theater. I stood behind him, my arms wrapped around myself, the chill of the room seeping into my bones. A single video file appeared on the screen. He clicked it. The image was grainy, shot from a hidden camera, a man with silver hair and a smile that never reached his cold, reptilian eyes dominated the frame. Maylor Rook, CEO of Rook Consortium. He was talking to a man in a suit, a man whose face was carefully angled away from the camera. A small insignia was visible on the man's lapel. FCA. They were discussing logistics, shipping lanes, and delivery protocols. Then Rook gestured to a crate in the corner of the video. Stenciled on its side was a single word, Seraphim. "It's an algorithm," I heard myself say, the words feeling foreign in my own mouth. "It infiltrates and redirects supply chains." Cassian's eyes remained fixed on the screen, but I knew he was listening to me. He was listening to every beat of my heart, every hitch in my breath. And then I heard it, a voice in the background, muffled but achingly familiar. "The encryption layer won't hold if they stress test the primary server." It was Jax, my brother. His tone was clipped, professional, but underneath it, I could hear the strain. The subtle tremor of a man speaking with a weapon pointed at his back. He was a data infrastructure engineer. He built systems. He didn't design weapons. He was being forced. My breath caught in my throat. All the air in the silent room seemed to rush out of me. It was one thing to fear it, to know it in the abstract. It was another to hear his voice. So close and yet impossibly far. A ghost in a machine. Cassian tilted his head, his focus sharpening. "That FCA agent's insignia." He said, his voice a low murmur. "It's wrong. The eagle's facing the wrong way. He touched a comms link on his console. June, get the darkroom online. I'm sending them a file. I want pixel analysis on the insignia and a voice print match on the man in the background. Now. He turned in his chair to face me. The cold, analytical mask was back in place. The man on your gurney. What else did he tell you? This was it. The final card. The truth. Raw and unvarnished. I met his gaze, refusing to look away. He said they're holding Jack's at Cold Storage Warehouse 12 in Delta Parish. He said it's a front, a seafood distribution company called Blue Shrike Foods. Cashin stared at me for a long, silent moment. His face gave nothing away, but I could feel the weight of his decision-making, the gears turning behind those stormy eyes. He had the information now. He could take the USB, send his own people, and cut me loose. He could turn me over to whatever alphabet soup agency was hunting me, or he could help. It was a choice between taking what he wanted and investing in a potential asset. He chose a third option, an option I hadn't considered. Rook wants this drive, he stated, his voice flat, and the FCA, or whoever they are, wants you. They believe you know more than you do. That makes you valuable. He paused. It makes you the perfect bait. Bait. The word was a bitter taste in my mouth. I wasn't a piece on his chessboard. Protected bait, he corrected smoothly. You will draw them out, and my people will be waiting in the shadows when they come for you. A cold fury mixed with my fear. He wanted to use me, to dangle me in front of a pack of wolves to see which one was the leader. But my fury was useless. My only leverage was the one thing I cared about more than my own life. No, I said, my voice shaking but firm. You rescue Jax first. Get him out, get him safe. After that, I'll be whatever you want. Bait, a witness, a ghost. I'll walk away from your life and never look back. But he comes first. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. You have the right to decide, Lyra, he said softly, the words like silk sliding over a razor's edge. But don't make promises your heart can't keep. Before I could retort, June entered the room. She moved with her usual silent grace, holding a small projector. With a click, a detailed satellite map of New Orleans bloomed across one of the soundproofed walls. Dozens of small red dots pulsed over the city's grid. Rook's holdings and known operational zones, June announced, her voice as crisp as the image. He's concentrated in Bywater in the Lower Garden District. He owns the shells for 3 shipping companies, 2 logistics firms, and a cold storage facility in Delta Parish. She pointed to a red dot that was slightly larger than the others, Warehouse 12. Rowe, the mountain of a man, appeared at the doorway. His face was grim. Boss, we have a problem. I've confirmed it. Someone sold our dinner reservation tonight. There's a leak inside our own organization. The air in the room became heavy, charged with a new kind of tension. The threat wasn't just outside, it was in the house. Cassian's gaze swept from the map, past his most trusted people, and settled back on me. The intensity of his focus was a physical force. Tell me again, Lyra, he asked, his voice low and piercing. That tear in the restaurant, did you cry because you were scared, or because you missed your brother? The question was a scalpel, designed to cut straight to the core of me. He wasn't just gathering facts, he was assessing my motivation, my strength, my breaking point. I lifted my chin. Neither, I said, the words coming out clear and cold. I cried because I hate being helpless. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not calculation, not suspicion, respect. He stood up and walked toward me, stopping just a few feet away. Give me your hand, he said. It wasn't a request. Hesitantly, I extended my hand. He didn't shake it. Instead, he placed his hand over mine, his grip firm and warm, enveloping my much smaller hand completely. It was a strange, almost archaic gesture, a seal. You tell me the truth, every part of it, he said. His eyes locked on mine, and I give you my word, your brother will not be used as a pawn by me or by anyone else. He walks away from this clean. It was the best I was going to get. A promise from a man who ruled a world of broken promises. I believed him. I will, I whispered. The moment was shattered by the sudden, percussive thumping of helicopter blades passing low over the tower. Silas, who'd been standing guard at the door, touched his earpiece. His body went rigid. "Signal from our asset inside Rook's Logistics," Silas reported, his voice tight with urgency. "Rook has initiated a sanitation protocol. They're scrubbing evidence. Warehouse 12 is moving its high-value assets. Tonight." Jacks. They were moving Jacks. The room snapped into a new state of focus. The psychological chess match was over. The clock was now ticking. Cassian released my hand, his entire demeanor shifting into that of a field general. "Operation Midnight Roulade is a go," he commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Full tactical deployment. We hit the warehouse in 90 minutes. I want schematics, entry points, and exit strategies in 10. His team moved like a well-oiled machine, a flurry of controlled, purposeful action. I was about to be left behind, a protected package to be stowed somewhere safe, but I wasn't a package. I was a paramedic, and my brother was in there. "I'm going with you," I said. Cassian stopped and turned, an eyebrow raised. "That is not an option." "My brother might be hurt," I argued, stepping forward, refusing to be intimidated. "You'll need a medic on site, someone who can provide immediate trauma care in the field. That's what I do. I'm not dead weight. I'm an asset." He studied my face, weighing my words, my resolve. I saw the refusal in his eyes, the cold logic that said a civilian had no place on a raid, but I also saw the flicker of respect I'd earned moments before. "Fine," he conceded. The word clipped. The concession came with a litany of conditions. "You will wear a light armor vest. You will be assigned a separate, pre-planned exfiltration route. You will not engage. You will not deviate from my orders. And if you hear the word cinnamon from any member of my team, you will run down that route without question or hesitation. Your safety becomes their primary priority. Do you understand?" Cinnamon. The word was so random, so out of place in this world of violence and strategy, that it stuck in my mind, a safe word, a lifeline. "I understand," I said, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and fierce determination. He gave me one last hard look. "See that you do," he said, before turning to his team. "Let's go to work." The world became a smear of wet asphalt and streaking headlights. We moved as a 3-car convoy, a trio of black sedans devouring the miles of the Pontchartrain Expressway. The rain was relentless, a percussive drumming on the roof that matched the frantic beat of my own heart. The light armor vest felt foreign and constricting against my ribs, a constant reminder that this was real. My medical kit, usually a source of comfort, felt impossibly heavy on my lap. Inside our car, the only sounds were the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the calm, digitized voice from the internal comm system. A tablet mounted on the dash displayed a thermal imaging feed from a Vesper drone hovering unseen in the storm above. It showed Warehouse 12 as a large, cold blue rectangle, dotted with the tiny, flickering heat signatures of guards. I watched Cassian. When he wasn't looking at the feed, his eyes were on the road ahead, but his focus was elsewhere. It was a study in controlled stillness, a stark contrast to the storm raging both outside the car and inside my chest. He listened to the terse reports from June and Silas in the other vehicles. His only response? A quiet, one-word command. Proceed. Acknowledge. Wait. His voice never rose. It was the voice of a man who didn't need volume to command obedience. His gaze would flick to the side mirrors, to the digital map, to the rear view. He wasn't just planning the attack. He was mapping every possible exit, every potential failure point. In a world of wolves and hunting dogs, he was the old fox, the one who knew the terrain down to the last stone and shadow. We peeled off the expressway, plunging into the industrial maze of Delta Parish. The warehouse complex rose from the marshland like a forgotten behemoth. A long line of refrigerated container trucks sat idling, their diesel engines a low thrum in the night. The logo on their sides was a cheerful-looking bird and the words, "Blue Shrike Foods," a perfect, unassuming lie. Our car rolled to a silent stop in a blind spot between two containers. The comms crackled. "Sector B power is down," June's voice reported. Calm as ever. "Camera feeds are on a loop," Silas added a second later. "Magnetic locks are disengaged. Row confirmed. You have a 60-second window." Cassian looked at me. His eyes weren't cold now. They were sharp, focused, and held a clear, unspoken command. "Stay with me. Do exactly as I say." I gave a single, tight nod. We moved, not running but flowing through the shadows with a speed and silence that was terrifying. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and damp earth. We reached a service entrance, a heavy steel door that now stood slightly ajar. Cassian slipped through, and I followed, my heart in my throat. Inside, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The main floor was a cavern of stacked crates and hanging sides of frozen meat. The air tasted of ice and metal. My designated entry point was an industrial ice chute, a stainless steel slide used for loading freezer compartments. It was dark, narrow, and slick with frost. "Go," Cassian murmured, his hand on the small of my back, a brief, guiding pressure. "Silas is on the other side. Do not stop until you reach the central processing room." I slid into the chute. The cold was a physical shock, a brutal, biting presence that cut through my clothes and stole my breath. I landed with a soft thud on a grated floor below. The sound swallowed by the hum of the giant freezer units. Silas was there, a dark shape in the gloom. He pointed down a narrow corridor lined with thick, insulated pipes. I moved, my training as a paramedic kicking in, my mind focusing on the task, pushing the fear down. Every breath was a cloud of white vapor. And then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic clink, clink, clink. It was a sound I knew, the hollow, plastic sound of polycarbonate, the cuffs they used for high-risk transport. My stomach twisted. Jax. I reached the doorway to the central processing room. It was a sterile, white space, empty except for a single metal chair in the center, and my brother, slumped in it. He was pale, his face bruised, but he was breathing. He was alive. The relief was so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. My path was blocked by a man who seemed carved from granite and malice. He was broad-shouldered and wore a tactical vest over a black shirt. He held a large, serrated knife with a practiced ease that made my blood run cold. Cade Morrow, Rook's enforcer. From the shadows on the other side of the room, Cassian emerged. He moved without a sound, a phantom in the frozen air. He and Cade faced each other across the room, with my brother as the prize between them. "Rook wants Seraphim," Cade said, his voice a low growl. "I just want the asset." "A conflict of interest," Cassian replied, his tone conversational, almost pleasant, "because Rook gets neither. I'm here for the man." Cade smiled, a chilling, joyless expression. Plans change. He reached over to a large industrial tank connected to the room's ventilation system and twisted a valve. A loud hiss filled the room, followed immediately by the suffocating, bleach-like stench of chlorine gas. Greenish-yellow vapor began to pour from the vents. Panic seized me, a primal scream in my mind, chlorine, in an enclosed space. We had seconds. But through the terror, years of training surged to the surface. Airway, breathing, circulation. I lunged for an emergency panel on the wall, my gloved fingers fumbling for the right button. I slammed my palm on the red switch labeled Emergency Purge. A klaxon blared and massive fans roared to life, the powerful suction pulling the deadly gas towards the ceiling vents. I grabbed a spare oxygen mask and tank from my kit, turned the valve, and scrambled to my brother's side. Jax, it's me." I strapped the mask over his face. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, but he was breathing. The room was a blur of motion. Cade lunged, not at me, but at Cassian. The clash was brutally short and silent. There were no grunts, no wasted movements. Cade's knife slashed through the air. Cassian deflected it with his forearm, a folding blade appearing in his own hand as if by magic. He didn't stab or slash. He moved inside Cade's guard, the flat of his blade slapping the man's wrist with surgical precision. Cade's knife clattered to the floor, a sharp, precise strike to the side of his neck, and the big man crumpled, unconscious but alive, through it all. Cassian's eyes never left me. He was watching me, making sure I was safe, even in the middle of a fight. Suddenly, a gunshot echoed from the outer warehouse, a stray round from Rook's other men. A hornet buzzed past my ear, and I felt a sharp impact on the side of my helmet. I stumbled back, my head ringing. Before I could fall, Cassian was there. He spun, pulling me against him, his body a solid wall of muscle and armor, shielding me from the direction of the shot. I felt a heavy thud against his back, right between his shoulder blades. He absorbed the impact without a grunt, his grip on me only tightening. My heart, which had been hammering, seemed to stop altogether. He'd taken a bullet for me. "Time to go," he said, his voice a low command in my ear, his breath warm against my skin. He was already pushing me toward a service hatch in the floor I hadn't noticed. Silas. Silas appeared, pulling open the heavy grate. It led down into darkness. He nodded at Cassian. "Wastewater channel. It's a straight run to the canal. I've set a charge on the outer wall." Cassian half lifted, half dragged my groggy brother to his feet. "Can you walk?" he asked. Jax nodded weakly. We descended into the tunnel, the stench of stagnant water replacing the sterile cold of the freezer. "Behind us!" Silas's voice crackled over the comms. "Clear!" A muffled explosion shook the tunnel, and a section of the far wall collapsed, followed by a thunderous cascade of icy water, the escape route. We scrambled through the narrow, dark channel, the water chillingly cold around our ankles. We emerged onto a concrete canal bank, the rain plastering my hair to my face. A sleek black speedboat was waiting, its engine idling silently. Roe was at the helm. We clambered aboard, and the boat shot away from the bank, melting into the darkness of the industrial waterway. I looked back. The warehouse was suddenly bathed in an unholy blue light, and then flames erupted from its roof, a silent, ravenous inferno consuming everything inside. Rook was destroying his own tracks. I turned my attention to Jax. He was shivering, but his eyes were clearer now. He looked from me to Cassian, then back to me. His voice was a weak, ragged whisper. "Seraphim, Lyra, it's not just code." He coughed, a racking sound. "It's a key. It opens the doors to the national medical stockpiles, all of them." The implication hit me like a physical blow, the power to control the distribution of life-saving supplies during a national crisis, the power to decide who lived and who died on a massive scale. I started to tremble. Not from the cold, but from the sheer, terrifying scope of what we'd stumbled into. A heavy weight settled over my shoulders. Cassian was draping his own jacket over me. It was warm from his body heat, and the familiar scent of oak and rain was a strange comfort in the chaos. The simple gesture was an anchor, a small moment of humanity in the middle of a war. We transferred to a waiting vehicle that looked, ironically, like an ambulance. Inside, it was a mobile command center. In the relative quiet, with only the sound of the rain and the engine, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a shaky exhaustion in its wake. I saw a thin line of red trickling from Cassian's hand. A piece of shrapnel from the explosion must have caught him. Without a word, I opened my med kit. "Let me see," I said. It wasn't a question. He held out his hand. It was a clean but deep, 2-inch laceration across his knuckles. As I cleaned the wound, my fingers brushed against a pale, puckered line of scar tissue on his collarbone, visible just above the collar of his shirt. An old wound, a reminder of a life I couldn't possibly imagine. He didn't flinch as I put in the neat, precise stitches. When I was done, my hand lingered on his for a fraction of a second too long. I looked up and met his eyes. In the dim light of the ambulance, his gaze was intense, unreadable. The silence between us was thick, charged with everything that had happened: the shattered window, the chlorine gas, the bullet in his vest. He had kept his promise. He had brought my brother back. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was far from over. His eyes held the same knowledge. Amidst the drumming rain, I could almost hear his voice from the restaurant, a promise hanging in the air between us. Dinner's not over. The string house was not a house. It was a sanctuary, hidden in plain sight on a quiet street in the French Quarter. From the outside, it was an unassuming Creole cottage with a wrought iron balcony. Inside, it was a world unto itself. The walls were lined with warm, dark wood, and the air was filled with the comforting, layered scents of old paper, violin rosin, and a faint, spicy hint of cinnamon. Cases holding violas, cellos, and antique mandolins lined the hallways like sleeping sentinels. It was Cassian's ace in the hole, a place of absolute security and anonymity. Jax was in a back room, sleeping a deep, dreamless sleep under the effects of a mild sedative I'd administered from my kit. The bruising on his face stood out starkly against his pale skin, but his breathing was even, his heart rate steady. He was safe. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I could allow myself to breathe. Cassian led me not to a sitting room, but to a small, warm kitchen at the back of the house. It was a simple, functional space, but it felt more real than the opulent restaurant or the sterile listening room. Without a word, he moved to the stove, filling a small pot with milk. The motions were practiced, efficient. While the milk warmed, he opened a canister, and the rich, dark scent of cocoa filled the air. He set 2 mugs on the thick wooden island, and next to mine, he placed a small, unopened jar of black licorice. I stared at it. It was such a small thing. During our first and only other real conversation, I'd mentioned that I chewed on it during long shifts to stay focused. He had remembered. A man who managed a criminal enterprise, who commanded men with a single glance, had remembered a paramedic's nervous habit. The simple, thoughtful gesture did what the gunfire and the chase could not. It completely disarmed me. Slowly, we began to shed the layers of the night. It started with him. He peeled off his tactical gloves, finger by finger, and placed them on the counter. His hands, now bare, were strong and scarred. The knuckles on his right hand still slightly swollen from where I'd stitched them. They were the hands of a fighter, but also the hands that had just carefully measured out cocoa powder. I reached behind my back and unclipped the buckles of the armor vest. It slid off my shoulders and landed on a chair with a heavy, muffled thud. I felt instantly lighter, more vulnerable, more myself. He was no longer the untouchable crime boss, and I was no longer a field medic in over her head. We were just a man and a woman, standing in a quiet kitchen while a storm raged outside. He slid a mug of hot cocoa across the island to me. The warmth seeped into my cold hands. "You never answered my question," he said, his voice softer now, stripped of the hard edge of command. "The real reason you cried." I looked down into the dark, swirling liquid. The lie was gone. The half-truths were gone. All that was left was the raw, aching honesty. "When we were kids," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "Jax and I, we were bounced around a lot. Foster homes, some were okay, some were not. We only had each other. We made a promise. No matter how bad it got, we would never let them see us cry. Crying was weakness. Crying meant they were winning." I took a shaky breath, the memory still sharp, still painful. Tonight, at that table, seeing you, knowing what you were. I felt so completely out of my depth. And then the text came. And I thought about Jax, and for the first time in 20 years, I broke our promise. I cried because I felt helpless. And it was a feeling I had promised my brother he would never have to see in me again. The confession hung in the air between us, fragile and real. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell me I was strong. He simply listened, his gaze steady and unwavering. He accepted my broken piece of the past without judgment. After a long moment, he turned and walked over to an old turntable in the corner. He selected a vinyl record, the soft hiss and crackle filling the silence before the music began. A lone, mournful trumpet cried out, a bluesy, heart-wrenching melody that seemed to speak the language of the rain on the window panes. St. James Infirmary, a song about loss and regret. "I hate hospitals," he said quietly, his back still to me. "The smell, antiseptic and despair, it reminds me of a time when I was the one who was helpless." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. It was his piece of the truth, offered in exchange for mine. A small, carefully chosen confession that leveled the ground between us completely. He turned back to face me. The space between us felt charged, alive with unspoken things. He took a step closer, then another, moving with a deliberate slowness that was a question in itself. He stopped in front of me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He didn't reach for me. He waited. He was giving me the choice, the power to close the final distance or to step away. My heart was a frantic, fluttering thing in my chest. This was dangerous territory, more dangerous than a warehouse full of armed men. But I wasn't afraid. I met his gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That was all the permission he needed. He raised a hand, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of damp hair from my cheek. The touch was electric, a spark in the quiet room. His other hand came to rest on my lower back, a warm, solid pressure through the thin fabric of my dress. His thumb drew a slow, soothing circle, a silent reassurance. He lowered his head, his breath warm against my collarbone, and I felt the faint, thrilling ghost of a touch before his lips finally met mine. The kiss was not what I expected. It wasn't the kiss of a conqueror, of a man who took what he wanted. It was tentative, exploratory, unbelievably gentle. It was a question, asking for permission, and I answered by leaning into him, my own hands coming up to rest on his chest. I could feel his heart beating, a steady, powerful rhythm that seemed to calm the frantic fluttering of my own. It deepened, growing from a soft press to something more confident, more certain. But just as the intensity began to build, I felt a flicker of the old panic, the fear of losing control. My fingers tightened on his shirt, a reflexive, silent signal. He felt it, instantly. He pulled back, just enough to look into my eyes. He didn't break the contact, but he slowed everything down, yielding control of the moment to me. He was listening, not just with his ears, but with his entire body. "Don't make me feel small," I whispered, the words raw and honest in the space between us. "Let me be on your level." A flicker of understanding passed through his eyes. He nodded once, a sharp, definite movement, and then he did something that took my breath away. He slid his hands to my waist, and with an easy strength, he lifted me, setting me on the edge of the wooden island. Just like that, we were face to face, eye to eye, equals. The gesture undid me. It was a profound act of respect, an acknowledgement of the strength I fought so hard to maintain. I leaned forward, initiating the kiss this time, my hands sliding from his chest to cup his face. It was a different kiss now, deeper, more sure. All the fear was gone, replaced by a dizzying sense of discovery. He brushed my hair back from my face, his thumb stroking my temple, his eyes asking another, deeper question. I answered by hooking my heel around his hip, pulling him closer until there was no space left between us at all. The curtains trembled slightly from the breeze of the storm outside. The night, which had been a symphony of violence and fear, softened into a long, quiet song meant only for us. Later, in a room that smelled of old wood and clean linens, he pulled a thick blanket over me. When he lay down beside me, he didn't pull me against him. He left a sliver of space, a final, silent question, an offer of choice. I shifted, closing the distance, and rested my head in the hollow of his shoulder. His arm came around me, holding me securely, but gently. "I can't promise you a perfect world," he murmured into my hair, his voice a low rumble against my ear. but I can promise you this. If you have nightmares, I'll wake you up. We face them together." It was more than anyone had ever promised me. It was enough. As I drifted off to sleep, feeling safe for the first time in days, two things happened in the world outside our quiet room. In the room down the hall, my brother, Jax, stirred in his medicated sleep. A small, voice-activated recorder on his wrist, which I had placed there to monitor his vitals, beeped softly as he mumbled a string of alphanumeric code, a new clue emerging from his subconscious. And miles away, a television screen flickered with a news report. Mailer Rook, philanthropist, had just pledged a massive donation to a newly established hurricane relief fund, washing his dirty money in the clean waters of public sympathy. I didn't know about any of that. I only knew the steady rhythm of Cassian's breathing and the gentle weight of his arm around me. I stared at the window, where raindrops traced paths down the glass like tears, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of being weak. I had found strength in a place I never thought to look for it. I had found it in him. The calm of the string house was a deceptive illusion. While Jack slept and the rain whispered against the windows, the digital heart of Vesper's operation, the dark room, was dissecting the data from the USB drive. The results came in just after dawn, displayed on a high-resolution screen in a small, shielded study. It was worse than I could have imagined. Seraphim wasn't just a supply chain algorithm. It was a parasite. The Darkroom's analysts had uncovered a malicious module designed to embed itself in disaster relief distribution networks. When activated, it would systematically reroute critical supplies, antibiotics, blood plasma, generators, clean water away from designated shelters and rural hospitals, redirecting them to shell corporations controlled by Maelor Rook. He wasn't just planning to steal resources. He was planning to create famines in the middle of floods, to let people suffer in the dark while he consolidated power. He would let the vulnerable die, then sell them back the very aid that was meant for them. The paramedic in me felt a cold, sickening rage. This was a mass casualty event in the making. When Jax finally woke, his mind groggy but clear, he filled in the final, critical piece. He sat propped up with pillows, a cup of tea trembling in his hands. "I couldn't stop him," he said, his voice raspy. He had a team watching my every keystroke, but I built in a failsafe, a soft back door. It's like a dead man's switch. It can only be deactivated by a specific piece of hardware, a physical key. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate hope. "The key I gave you for our old storage unit, after Mom. You know, I told you never to lose it. It's titanium, unique signature. It's the only thing that can shut Seraphim down without causing the entire federal system to crash." Suddenly, the small, familiar weight in my dress pocket felt like the fate of the entire Gulf Coast. I was no longer just a witness. I was the kill switch. The atmosphere in the string house shifted from a safe house to a war room. Cassian didn't pace. He stood before a whiteboard, absorbing information. His stillness a gravitational center around which everything else moved. His plan was audacious, built on the principle of using an opponent's own weight against him. He called it Operation Bayou Mirror. "We'll create our own disaster relief company," he explained, his voice low and steady. "Larkhaven Relief. We'll register it, give it a clean digital footprint, and then leak a rumor that we're bidding for a new FEMA contract. We'll make ourselves look like the perfect test subject for Seraphim. Rook won't be able to resist taking the bait." The plan was clever, but it had a flaw, a fatal one. "The leak," June stated, her arms crossed. "We still have a traitor. If we leak the information, the mole will pass it on. Rook will know it's a trap." "Exactly," Cassian said, a glint in his eye. "The mole won't pass on the whole truth, because the mole won't have it. We'll feed our people a partial plan. That Larkhaven Relief is a Vesper front to steal a test shipment. When Rook gets that information, he'll think he's one step ahead. He'll let the shipment proceed, but he'll set his own trap for us at the exchange point." He tapped a location on a digital map. "St. Roche Fountain, public, full of witnesses." A perfect place for an ambush to go wrong and paint Vesper as the aggressors. I saw the flaw in his logic, the one piece he was missing. Because it came from my world, not his. You can't go, I said, and all heads turned to me. You can't send a team to intercept a truck. It's too loud, too risky. But Rook isn't just moving a crate. He's moving data. He has to test the system. The truck will be a mobile hub, pinging the network, downloading routing information. An idea sparked, born of countless hours in an ambulance. We don't need the truck. We just need to get close enough to it to scrape the data. We send a different kind of team. I looked at Cassian. We stage a medical emergency. We create a fake ambulance, a Vesper ambulance. We can use a signal jammer to create a dead zone, then broadcast a fake EKG from a patient inside in a level 4 disaster simulation, which is what Seraphim runs on. All transport hubs are required by federal mandate to grant priority access to emergency vehicles. We don't have to fight his men. We just drive right in. The room was silent. Cassian stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. Brilliant, he murmured. June was already at a keyboard. I can do one better. I can hack the LED billboard on the I-10 approach. We'll set a trigger phrase. When the truck passes it, the board will flash a coded message. When the river reverses, it will be the signal for our mobile team to change their route and move in. The plan was solidifying, becoming a complex, multi-layered machine, but there was another piece. Jax. His name was now tied to a weapon of mass disruption. He was a liability to powerful people. There's a woman, Cassian said, his focus shifting. Etta Sorrell. She operates in the financial shadows. She launders reputations, not just money. She can make Jax a ghost, erase him from every blacklist that matters, but she'll want something in return. The meeting took place that night in the cavernous, dust-choked interior of the abandoned Orpheum Theater. The air was thick with the ghosts of old performances. Etta Sorrell was a striking woman in her 60s, with silver hair cut in a severe, modern style and eyes that saw through everything. She was not intimidated by Cassian. She listened patiently as he laid out the deal, the core function of Seraphim, in exchange for a clean slate for Jax Bennett. This is a powerful tool, Cassian, Etta said, her voice smooth as aged whiskey. You could control the flow of commerce in half the country with this. What is your assurance to me that you aren't simply trading one tyrant for another? Prove to me you don't intend to simply seize this weapon for yourself. It was the question that hung over everything, the question of trust. Before Cassian could answer, I stepped forward. The words came to me, clear and certain. You're looking at it the wrong way. Miss Sorrell, I said. The two of them turned to look at me, surprised. I'm a paramedic. When I see a major wound, my first thought isn't how to use the bleeding to my advantage. My first thought is how to stop it. Seraphim isn't a weapon. It's a wound, a vulnerability in the systems we all depend on. It's a hole that needs to be stitched shut, not sold to the highest bidder. The silence that followed was different. Etta's sharp, analytical gaze softened slightly. She was looking at me, really looking at me, for the first time. I saw Cassian take a half step back, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture. He was ceding the floor to me. He realized, in that moment, that my voice, the voice of a healer, of an ordinary person caught in extraordinary circumstances, carried a kind of weight that his never could in this arena. I wasn't a player in their game. I was a representative of the people who would pay the price if they failed. Etta gave a slow, deliberate nod. The Meridian Benevolent Fund, she said, and just like that, the deal was struck. She had given us the final piece of the puzzle. That's Rook's primary vehicle for washing his capital. It's his public face of compassion. Expose the fund, and you expose the man. She agreed to help Jax. The storm was gathering. The Metropolitan Integrity Bureau, no doubt under Rook's influence, sent Cassian an ultimatum: turn over the USB drive and all related materials in exchange for a potential immunity deal. It was a trap, a way to bury the evidence and identify all of Vesper's assets. Cassian's reply was a single, untraceable message, A picture of a chess piece, a knight, positioned to fork a king and queen. No. Rook, feeling the pressure, retaliated. The message came not through official channels, but through the dark, whispered currents of the city's underworld. A price was placed on Cassian Vale's head, a price so high it would give a man control of the ports. The city held its breath. Alliances began to fray. That night, in the quiet of the string house, the weight of it all finally settled on Cassian's shoulders. He stood by the window, looking out at the rain-swept city that was now hunting him. "If I fall," he said, his voice quiet, "they won't let Vesper stand. They'll carve it up, my people. Everything I've built will be gone." It was the first time I'd ever seen him admit to any kind of vulnerability. I came to stand beside him, my shoulder almost touching his. I thought of the promise he'd made me in my helplessness, and I offered him the only thing I could in return, not comfort but strength. "Then stand somewhere no one can push you from," I said. He turned to look at me, a question in his eyes. "You can't fight him in the shadows," I continued, the plan forming in my mind, audacious and terrifying. "He's expecting that. You can't win a war of attrition against his money and his political influence. You have to fight him in the light, his charity gala, the gala for the Waterlands. It's his stage, where he plays the part of the city's savior. You have to take the fight to him there. Rip the mask off his face in front of everyone he's trying to impress." He stared at me, and I saw the idea take root, the cold, calculating strategist in him seeing the brutal, beautiful logic of it, hiding in plain sight, using Rook's own morality play as the setting for his downfall. He nodded slowly. "On his own stage," he repeated, the words tasting of iron and resolution. The chess game was over. It was time to overturn the board. The Museum of Lunar Glass was a cathedral of light and money. Sculptures spun from molten crystal hung from the ceiling like frozen constellations, refracting the light of 1,000 tiny lamps. The city's elite drifted through the space, a glittering river of silk and diamonds, their laughter echoing off the polished marble floors. Mailer Rook stood at the center of it all, the benevolent Sun King, accepting praise and donations for his gala for the Waterlands. He wore the mask of a philanthropist, but I could see the cold, reptilian glitter in his eyes. He was a predator, hosting a feast for the sheep. I felt like an imposter all over again, but this time, the feeling was different. It wasn't born of fear, but of purpose. My dress was a deep, mossy green, a simple boat neck that left my collarbones bare. It was elegant, unassuming, and armed. Sewn into a reinforced seam at my waist, the titanium key lay flat against my skin. A cold, secret promise. Across the room, Cassian was a study in minimalist perfection. His tuxedo was impeccably tailored, but he wore it with a casualness that bordered on disdain. His bow tie was undone by a single, precise degree, a calculated imperfection designed to signal to his enemies that he was utterly, dangerously relaxed. He was a panther that had wandered into a peacock enclosure, and every eye was drawn to him. Our gazes met across the crowded room. Cassian inclined his head slightly, a silent acknowledgement. Then his eyes shifted, and I followed his line of sight to Mailer Rook, who was now looking directly at him. A smile spread across Rook's face, a polished public relations masterpiece. Cassian returned it with a lazy, confident smirk of his own. The smiles were identical in their complete and utter lack of warmth. It was a declaration of war exchanged over champagne flutes. Etta Sorrel materialized at my side, a vision in silver. "He's so proud of his temporary command center," she murmured, her eyes on Rook. Auction servers, security feeds, all routed through the curator's office on the second floor. Terribly convenient. She then glided away from me and intercepted Rook, greeting him with a theatrical warmth that drew his full attention. As she laughed at something he said, her eyes met mine, and she gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod towards a service corridor hidden behind a floral arrangement. My opening. But I couldn't move yet. The orchestra had begun to play a slow, haunting waltz. Cassian was suddenly in front of me, his hand extended. "May I have this dance?" he asked. His voice, a low murmur, meant only for me. I placed my hand in his, and he led me onto the floor. The moment he pulled me close, the glittering, noisy room faded away. His hand was a warm, firm presence on my lower back, his other hand holding mine. We moved together seamlessly, as if we had been dancing this waltz our entire lives. The world shrank until it was only the two of us, the mournful music of the strings, and the unspoken tension that crackled between us. "The server room is my job," I whispered, my lips close to his ear. "You need to be down here, visible." "If anything feels wrong," he murmured back, his breath warm against my temple. "If the temperature changes by 1/2 degree, you use the emergency exit I showed you. You get out. That is a direct order. Lyra." I looked up into his stormy eyes. I saw the cold strategist, the commander protecting an asset. But underneath, I saw something else, too. A flicker of genuine fear, not for himself, but for me. "I'm not leaving my partner in the middle of the song," I said softly. A corner of his mouth tilted up in that rare, almost smile. He spun me, my green dress flaring out around me, and for a single, breathtaking moment, I felt weightless. I felt safe. As the waltz ended, the main lights in the gala began to dim. A massive projection screen, previously hidden behind a velvet curtain, descended from the ceiling. Rook stepped up to a podium, his face illuminated by a single spotlight. "Tonight," he began, his voice smooth and resonant, "we celebrate the resilience of our beautiful wetlands." On the screen, a beautiful, high-definition video began to play, sweeping drone shots of the bayou, majestic cypress trees, soaring egrets. It was the promotional video June had described, the first part of the trap. And then it began. A thin, red line, like a crack in the beautiful facade, appeared on the screen, tracing a path from a port in New Orleans. Another appeared, then another. Text boxes bloomed, showing account numbers, shell corporations, offshore banks. The beautiful promotional video morphed into a stark, undeniable flow chart. The guests murmured, confused. The red lines snaked across the map, from the Meridian Benevolent Fund, through a dozen dummy accounts, and ended at Rook's privately owned enterprises. It was a forensic accountant's masterpiece, a graphic and irrefutable map of his money laundering operation. A collective gasp went through the crowd. A few people, thinking it was some kind of avant-garde performance art, began to applaud uncertainly. Rook stood frozen at the podium, his face a mask of disbelief, then slowly darkening into pure fury. The men in security uniforms, the MIB agents posing as guards, began speaking frantically into their wrists. Their professional calm shattered. Across the room, I saw Cassian catch Ro's eye. The big man had gone pale, his gaze darting towards the exits. Silas's voice came through the tiny, invisible earpiece I wore. "It's confirmed, boss. Security logs from the restaurant. The service-level gate was open 10 seconds before the shooter was in position. Remote authorization. Ro was the only one on that channel." Cassian's eyes locked on his traitorous bodyguard. He didn't shout. He didn't gesture. He simply looked at him, and in that single, frozen moment, he passed a sentence. Ro flinched as if struck, and then he turned and melted into the panicking crowd. This was my chance. Amidst the chaos, I slipped away, heading for the service corridor Etta had indicated. The curator's office was unlocked. Inside, a temporary server rack hummed softly, its blinking lights the secret heart of Rook's gala. I had moments. I took out a small device June had given me and was about to plug it into the main port when a voice behind me made me freeze. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Miss Bennett." I turned. It was the man from the video, the fake FCA agent, Ari Sen. He was calm, his smile placid, his hands held out in a gesture of peace. "Mailer Rook is a dangerous man," he said soothingly, "but you don't have to be a part of this. I can offer you safe passage, witness protection, a new life. All I need is the item you're carrying, the titanium key. My mind raced. He was offering me a cage disguised as a sanctuary. I had to get him out of this room. I widened my eyes, letting my face crumple into an expression of fear and confusion. The key I don't know what you're talking about. I backed away, stumbling deliberately towards the entrance of the main gallery. The room opened into an exhibit featuring a large, interactive art piece, a maze of interlocking glass chambers, sleek and modern. "Please," I whimpered, "just let me go." He followed me, his expression a mixture of pity and predatory confidence. He thought he had me. He thought I was just a scared paramedic. "Just give it to me, Lyra. It's for the best." I backed into the central glass chamber of the sculpture. He followed me in, the glass door hissing shut behind him. He was cornering his prey. "It's over," he said softly. "You're right," I said, my voice suddenly clear and steady. I ducked under his arm, slid out the other side of the chamber just as the door was closing, and slapped my palm on an emergency lock panel on the outside of the exhibit. A series of pneumatic bolts shot into place with a series of loud, final clicks. Ari Sen was trapped inside a soundproof, bulletproof glass box. His calm demeanor shattered, his face contorting in rage as he hammered his fists uselessly against the glass. My earpiece crackled. It was Cassian. His voice was a low, amused rumble. "You learn fast." My victory was short-lived. At that exact moment, the entire museum was plunged into absolute darkness. A collective scream went up from the crowd. The power cut was total. Rook was moving to Plan B. My earpiece went dead. I was on my own. Chaos erupted. People were shoving, running blindly in the dark. I could feel Rook's private security, no longer pretending to be ushers, moving through the crowd with purpose, like sharks in a feeding frenzy. And then, cutting through the panic, came a new sound from outside, the deep, resonant blast of a riverboat horn. He wasn't just running, he was moving his assets, the auction items, the servers, everything onto the water. I fought my way through the terrified mob, desperate to get back to Cassian. I found him near the main entrance, a calm, unmovable island in the torrent of panic. He was scanning the crowd, his face a grim mask in the intermittent flashes of cell phone lights. He saw me, and his shoulders relaxed by a fraction of an inch. Just as he reached for my hand, a shape emerged from the darkness. It was Rook. His face was twisted with a cold, precise fury. He leaned in close to Cassian, his voice a venomous whisper that I could just barely hear over the din. "Dinner's not over, Vale," he hissed. "We'll have dessert on the river." He vanished back into the darkness. Cassian's hand found mine, his grip like steel. He didn't have to say anything. I knew. This wasn't over. We were going after him. We wouldn't let the tide carry our only chance away. The Mississippi was a churning, black ribbon in the dark, swallowing the lights from the distant shore. The wind tasted of mud and rain, a wild, primal scent that was a world away from the rarefied air of the gala. The yacht, the nightingale, cut through the choppy water, a blaze of light and defiant luxury, a floating fortress of stolen data and dirty money. We were the shadows hunting it. Our twin speedboats were matte black predators, running without lights, their powerful engines tuned to a low, guttural hum that was lost in the roar of the wind and water. I was in the lead boat with Cassian. My gala dress was soaked, clinging to my skin, but I barely felt the cold. Adrenaline was a fire in my veins. My elegant earpiece from the gala was gone, replaced by the familiar, functional headset of my own medical comms unit, which June had expertly patched into Vesper's encrypted channel. I had become the unlikely nerve center of the operation. "Silas, report status," I said, my voice steady, professional. My paramedic training had taught me how to function in chaos, how to be the calm voice when everything was falling apart. "Approaching the stern blind spot, 30 seconds to contact," Silas's voice crackled back. "June, what's your ETA on the upper deck?" "On your signal, Lyra, I'm ready to fly." I relayed the information to Cassian, who stood at the helm, His body braced against the boat's jarring movements. He piloted the craft with an innate, fluid grace. His eyes fixed on our target. He wasn't just driving, he was dancing with the river's angry currents. On the main deck of the Nightingale, visible through a pair of thermal binoculars, Mailer Rook was working frantically at a large, weatherproof monitor. Even from a distance, I could see the map displayed on the screen. It was a live feed of the Seraphim system. Red lines, representing diverted shipments, were spreading across the Gulf Coast like a virus. He was activating the test run, trying to salvage his data before we could get to him. "He's starting it," I said, my voice tight. "We're out of time." Cassian didn't answer. He simply spun the wheel. Our boat surged forward, pulling alongside the yacht's gleaming white hull. The size difference was laughable. We were a minnow chasing a shark. "Now," Silas Cassian commanded. From the second boat, a powerful magnetic grapple shot out, clamping onto the yacht's hull with a deafening clang. The two vessels were now locked together, bucking in the violent water. From our deck, June fired a grappling hook. It soared through the rain-whipped air, catching perfectly on the upper railing. She began her ascent, moving with the impossible speed and grace of a spider. At the same moment, Silas, now on the yacht's lower deck, moved like a ghost toward the bridge. A small canister hissed, and the captain slumped over his controls. "Bridge is secure," Silas reported a moment later. Cassian looked at me. "Your turn. Cargo bay hatch? Just like we planned. Stay on comms." He and his men swarmed up a rope ladder, their objective the main deck, their purpose to create a very loud, very violent distraction. I took a deep breath and scrambled onto the narrow gap between the two hulls, my fingers finding a maintenance latch. It opened into the yacht's cargo hold, a dark, cavernous space filled with crated auction items and the lingering scent of champagne and fear. I moved through the darkness, my senses on high alert, and then I smelled it. Beneath the scent of salt water and diesel, there was another, sharper odor. Antiseptic, the kind used to wipe down electronics to prevent static discharge. It was faint, but unmistakable to someone who spent her life in sterile environments. I followed the scent, my hand trailing along a row of crates, until I found a narrow, unmarked door. I eased it open. Inside was a small, climate-controlled room housing a humming rack of servers, the heart of the Nightingale, the heart of Seraphim. But I wasn't alone. Cade Morrow stood between me and the servers. His face was bruised from his encounter with Cassian, and the chilling smile was gone, replaced by a look of raw, cornered desperation. This time, there was no chlorine tank, no clever trap. There was only him and the ugly-looking wrench he held in his hand like a club. "The paramedic," he snarled. "You just don't know when to quit." He lunged. I threw myself back as the wrench whistled through the air where my head had been, smashing into a server with a shower of sparks. My comms unit crackled with the sounds of the fight on the deck above shouts. The heavy thud of bodies hitting the deck. Cassian was doing his job, creating the diversion. Now I had to do mine. Cade came at me again, his size and strength overwhelming. I dodged, my mind racing. I couldn't fight him, but I didn't have to. I was a paramedic. I knew the body's weaknesses. I knew the power of fear. As he lunged a third time, I sidestepped and dropped my medical kit, letting the contents spill across the floor. It was a calculated risk. His eyes flickered down to the mess for a split second, and it was the opening I needed. I didn't grab a weapon. I grabbed a saline pack, a packet of theatrical blood coagulant from the mass casualty simulation supplies, and a compression bandage. "You're hurt," I shouted, my voice filled with a fake, professional urgency. He paused, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Your arm," when the wrench hit the server. Before he could react, I moved in, not with aggression, but with purpose. I slapped the saline pack, now mixed with the fake blood, against his forearm. The dark, thick liquid gushed out, looking shockingly real in the dim light. "Arterial bleed," I screamed, my voice high with practiced panic. I started wrapping the compression bandage around his arm with frantic, expert speed. You have to apply pressure. You could bleed out in minutes. He looked down. In the flickering light of the damaged server, his arm was covered in what looked exactly like arterial blood, pumping rhythmically with his own panicked heartbeat. His face went pale. The desperate anger was replaced by a primal, wide-eyed terror. He had faced bullets and knives, but the sight of his own supposed lifeblood pouring out of him undid him completely. He pressed his other hand to the bandage, his mind completely derailed by the illusion. It gave me the seconds I needed. I scrambled to the main server rack, my fingers flying to my waist, retrieving the cold, titanium key. My comms unit crackled to life, but it wasn't the sound of fighting. It was Jax's voice, clear and strong, patched through from the string house. "Lyra, you there? I'm looking at the schematics. You see the main console?" "I see it. Jax," I said, my voice trembling with relief. At that moment, the door to the server room flew open. It was Cassian. His face was grim, his clothes soaked. He took in the scene me at the console, Cade staring in horror at his own arm, and didn't waste a second. He moved past me, placing his body between me and the door, a living shield. "Talk to me, Jax," I said, my focus narrowing to the console and my brother's voice. "Okay, you have to insert the key into the maintenance port. It's on the right," Jax instructed. "When you do, a command line will open. You have to type the override code. It will disable the malicious module without triggering a system-wide shutdown." I slid the key home. It fit perfectly. A black screen with a single blinking cursor appeared. Outside, the storm raged, and the rain lashed against a small porthole window. The sounds of the fight grew closer. A stray bullet ricocheted off the deck above. It tore through the thin wall of the server room, a deadly silver streak. I didn't even have time to flinch. Cassian moved, a blur of motion, positioning himself directly in front of me. The bullet slammed into a steel support column right beside his head, the impact ringing through the small room like a death knell. He didn't even blink, his focus entirely on me, on keeping me safe. For a few heartbeats, the world went silent. There was only the ringing in my ears, the steady presence of Cassian in front of me, and Jax's voice in my headset. "Lyra, the code, now." My fingers, shaking but sure, flew across the keyboard. I typed the alphanumeric string Jax had mumbled in his sleep, the code his subconscious had protected. I hit enter. For a second, nothing happened. Then, on the monitor, the red lines mapping Seraphim's theft flickered and vanished. The map reset, showing green pathways, supplies flowing to their intended destinations. In the corner of the screen, a status indicator for a small, rural hospital in the bayou switched from red to green. The delivery had been made. The people there would get their medicine. We had won. On the deck, the fighting stopped. Rook knew. He had lost. We heard the sound of a smaller engine firing up and then fading into the distance. He was running. Cassian looked over his shoulder, out the door, and for a moment I thought he would go after him. But he didn't. He turned back, his shoulders slumping in a wave of exhaustion I had never seen in him before. He looked at me, his eyes dark and intense. The strength that had held me together finally gave out. My legs buckled, and I slid down to the floor, the titanium key clutched in my hand. He was there in an instant, kneeling in front of me on the wet, vibrating floor of the machine room. He was drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead. But in that moment, he was the most solid thing in a world that had been spinning out of control. He reached out and gently touched his forehead to mine. A small, faint smile touched his lips. "You just saved the entire city," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Tears I didn't know I was holding back began to fall, mixing with the rain on my cheeks. "No," I whispered back, my voice choked. "I just saved dinner from being unfinished." He pulled me into his arms, and I clung to him, the two of us survivors on a small, steel island in the middle of a storm. We had won. We were alive. We were together. As our boat made its way back to the shore, I watched the lights of New Orleans grow brighter, a welcoming beacon against the receding darkness. The storm was breaking. My heart, which had been a tangled knot of fear and desperation, finally began to unfurl. I knew this wasn't the end. Rook was still out there. But as I leaned against Cassian's solid strength, I made a choice. I would stay in his world, in his arms, for another day. I would face whatever came next, with him. The days that followed the gala were a strange, surreal calm after the storm. The city was buzzing. Whispers turned into headlines. The Meridian Benevolent Fund had its assets frozen pending an investigation. Mayor Rook's carefully constructed image as the city's savior was fractured, but not yet shattered. He had vanished from the public eye, and the silence from his camp was more unnerving than any threat. He was a wounded snake, coiled in the shadows, and we all knew he had one last, venomous strike left in him. The first loose end was tied up not with a bang, but with a pathetic, desperate whimper. Silas found Roe hiding in the instrument storage room of the string house, huddled between a double bass and a rack of antique cellos. There was no fight in him. They brought him to the main room, and he fell to his knees before Cassian, a broken, trembling giant. He confessed everything, the money, the threats against a sister I never knew he had. He was a man drowning in debt and fear, and Rook had thrown him an anchor instead of a life raft. Cassian stood over him, his face carved from ice, his silence more terrifying than any rage. I could feel the violence simmering in him, the cold, hard justice of his world demanding its price. This was a betrayal of the highest order, and in his life, there was only one punishment for it. But Roe wasn't just begging for his life. He was trying to buy it. "I can give you the backup, boss," he sobbed, his face streaked with tears. "The real one, Seraphim's fail-safe server. He calls it the Blue Cross. I know where it is. Please, let me make this right." Cassian's hand clenched into a fist at his side. I saw the war in his eyes. The leader in him had to make an example of Roe. The strategist in him needed the information. It was a conflict that was tearing him apart. Before he could speak, I found my own voice. "Cassian." He turned to me, his eyes dark with the storm inside him. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting," I said, the words coming to me, clear and certain, born from 1,000 life-or-death decisions in the back of an ambulance. "It's not weakness. It's a strategic choice. Forgiveness, right now, means using his life to save countless others. That's a better use for him than a memory." I was speaking his language, not of morality, but of assets and outcomes. Roe, alive and useful, was a more valuable piece on the board than Roe dead and silent. The fist at Cassian's side slowly uncurled. He looked at Roe with a cold, dead gaze. "You will tell us everything, and then you will help us. Your life now belongs to this operation. It is the only reason it will continue." While we fought our battles in the shadows, the war for public opinion raged in the light. The MIB, desperate to cover its complicity, launched a vicious smear campaign, leaking doctored files that painted Cassian as a ruthless crime lord attempting to manipulate the city's relief efforts. But Etta Sorrell was a master of that game. She responded not with denials, but with a surgical strike of her own, releasing a trove of Rook's authenticated financial records to a small, fiercely independent news blog. The narrative shifted overnight. The story was no longer about Cassian Vale, the shadow. It was about Mayor Rook, the false saint. Amidst the chaos, a quiet miracle was happening down the hall. Jax was healing. The haunted, hunted look was slowly receding from his eyes, replaced by the familiar spark of focus and creation. He spent hours on a secure laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He wasn't dwelling on the trauma. He was building a weapon against it. He called it Harbor Light. It was a simple, elegant, open-source monitoring tool that allowed anyone to track aid shipments in real time, a public watchdog built from the ashes of Rook's secret. He was taking the very tool of his imprisonment and turning it into a shield for the vulnerable. Seeing him like that, empowered and brilliant, was a better balm for my soul than any promise of safety. The nature of my relationship with Cassian was changing, too. The frantic, desperate heat born of shared danger was settling into something deeper, steadier, a slow-burning ember that warmed me from the inside out. He watched me, not with the possessive eye of a man who had claimed something, but with a quiet, growing respect. He saw me strategize with June, consult with Jax on the technical aspects of Harbor Light, and argue a point of logistics with Silas. He saw that I was not a liability he had to protect, but a partner who could stand beside him, and he made space for me to do so. One morning, I came into the kitchen to find it filled with the soft, early light. His shirt from the day before was slung over the back of a chair, a starkly intimate and domestic sight in this house of secrets. I stood barefoot on the cool wooden floor, waiting for the coffee to brew, lost in my own thoughts. I didn't hear him approach. I only felt the warmth as he came up behind me, his arms sliding around my waist, his chin resting gently on my shoulder. We stood there in silence for a long moment, simply breathing together, watching the steam rise from the coffee pot. "Stay for this dinner with me," he murmured, his voice a low, warm rumble against my ear. "Tomorrow, and the day after that." It wasn't a question about a meal. It was the only way he knew how to ask for everything. It was a promise of a future I had never allowed myself to imagine. I leaned my head back against his chest and smiled, the expression hidden in the fragrant steam of my coffee cup. And I nodded. We talked later, establishing the kind of ground rules that two fiercely independent people needed to build something real. No tracking each other's phones, no making life-altering decisions for the other person, and a rule for when the pressure became too much, when the arguments that were bound to come threatened to boil over. If we disagreed, we would stop, we would touch hands, and we would count to 10. A simple, practical anchor in the storm of our lives, a way to remember that we were on the same side. The final battle began with a quiet message from Etta Sorrell. She had located the Blue Cross. The backup servers weren't in a high-tech facility, but in the catacombs beneath the long-abandoned St. Camille Cathedral in the Old Quarter. But Rook had laid a trap. The next day, notices appeared all over the city. The Meridian Benevolent Fund was hosting a candlelight memorial service at the very same cathedral to honor the victims of the recent port tragedy and pray for the city's resilience. It was a monstrously clever move. He was creating a human shield, inviting hundreds of innocent people to a place he knew would become a battlefield if Vesper raided the location. The ensuing chaos would be a massacre, and Rook would paint Cassian as a monster who targeted praying civilians. Cassian's team immediately began planning a full-scale assault, a way to isolate the catacombs and neutralize the threat. But I saw the flaw, the risk of civilian casualties, no matter how careful they were. "You can't go in with force," I said, interrupting their strategy session. "You have to take his shield away from him." All eyes turned to me. "He's using the light to hide," I explained. "So you have to drag him out of it. We can't stop people from going, but we can show them what they're walking into." An idea, born from June's billboard hack, sparked in my mind. We set up a live stream. Anonymous source? We get a drone or someone with a camera phone. Inside, we broadcast what's really happening, not a memorial, but a private army setting up a fortress. We show the city the truth. We force him to cancel his own event. Cassian looked at me, a slow, appreciative gleam in his eyes. He was seeing the board from a new angle. "We bring the light into the darkness," he said, the idea taking hold. But I wasn't finished. "Once the crowd is gone, he'll know we're coming. He'll either scrub the servers or move them. We can't give him that time. Someone has to be inside before the live stream even starts." A small team, he finished for me, understanding immediately. A very small team, I confirmed, someone to run interference, someone to handle the tech, and someone who can shut down the system. I looked from June to Cassian and then down at my own hands, my hands which held the knowledge of my brother's fail-safe, just the three of us. One way in, one way out. It was a massive risk, putting the 3 core members of the operation in one place with no backup, but it was also the cleanest, most direct path to victory. Cassian looked at June, who gave a single, sharp nod. Then he looked at me. He didn't question my place there. He didn't order me to stay behind. He saw me as I was an essential part of the plan. "All right," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "The 3 of us." And in that moment, the trust between us became a physical thing, a cord pulled taut, humming with the silent, immense pressure of everything that was to come. The catacombs beneath St. Camille were a place where time had forgotten to move. The air was thick and cold, heavy with the scent of damp earth, decaying stone, and the ghostly sweetness of centuries of burnt-out candles. Water dripped from the vaulted stone ceiling with a slow, maddeningly regular rhythm, each drop a tick of a metronome, counting down to some final, unknown moment. Wax from long-dead candles had flowed down the walls in pale, frozen rivers. It was a tomb, and we were walking willingly into its depths. We moved in a tight, silent formation, our only light coming from the low-lumen tactical flashlights we carried. June took the lead, her movements economical and fluid, a shadow in the shadows. Cassian was behind me, a solid, reassuring presence at my back. I focused on my breathing, trying to ignore the oppressive weight of the stone above and below us. We found our guide not by sight, but by smell, a faint, sharp, electric scent cutting through the musty air, ozone. The unmistakable smell of high-powered computer servers running hot in a poorly ventilated space. It grew stronger as we navigated the labyrinthine passages. A modern ghost in an ancient machine. It led us to a section of wall that looked no different from the rest, a solid expanse of old, crumbling brick. But June, running her gloved hand over the surface, found the seam, a perfectly cut, almost invisible outline of a door. There was no handle, no lock. As she worked on the panel with a small, specialized tool, a voice suddenly filled the crypt, amplified and distorted by the stone acoustics. It was Malor Rook. "Welcome, Cassian," the voice boomed, seeming to come from the very walls around us. "I was so hoping you'd accept my dinner invitation. The main course is about to be served. It's a dish best served cold. I find your trust." A low grinding sound echoed from above. I looked up. A solid slab of steel, inches thick, was descending from a hidden recess in the ceiling, sealing the passage behind us. June swore, a single, sharp syllable, and threw herself backward, rolling clear just as the slab slammed into the stone floor with a deafening, final boom. She was on the other side. We were trapped. At the same instant, the brick wall in front of us slid open, revealing not the server room, but a small, featureless antechamber constructed of modern steel. It was a box, a cage. Rook's voice laughed, a hollow, metallic sound. "Please, do come in. The table is set." There was no choice. We stepped through the opening. The moment we were both inside, the brick door slid shut behind us, and another steel slab dropped, sealing this side as well. We were entombed in a space no larger than a walk-in closet. A series of soft hisses echoed around us. The air began to thin. It was a subtle change at first, a lightness in my head, a slight increase in the effort required to draw a full breath. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of my consciousness, a pressure chamber. He was going to suffocate us. "Lyra," Cassian's voice was calm, steady, cutting through my rising fear. "Breathe with me." I looked at him. In the dim, sterile light of the chamber, his face was a mask of utter calm. He was controlling his fear, turning it into a tool. My medical training took over, a familiar port in a storm of terror. Regulate oxygen intake, slow the heart rate, conserve energy. Slow, deep breaths, I instructed, my voice coming out as a clinical, detached whisper. In through the nose for a count of 4, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 6. He nodded, his eyes locked on mine. We began to breathe in unison, a silent, shared rhythm in the suffocating space. He reached out and took my hand. His was steady and warm, an anchor in the dizzying void. I squeezed back, our linked hands a lifeline. The air grew thinner, and a roaring began in my ears. Black spots danced at the edge of my vision. My eyes scanned the smooth steel walls, searching for anything, any weakness. I saw it then, a small, flush-mounted sensor near the floor, pulsing with a faint, infrared light. It wasn't an air quality sensor. It was biometric. It was pointed directly at us. My medic's brain made the connection in an instant. It wasn't just about the air. It was about our reaction to the lack of it. "It's our heart rates," I whispered, the words a struggle. "The lock. It's a stress sensor. We have to keep our heart rates below the threshold. If we panic, we die." Cashin's eyes narrowed in understanding. He looked at the sensor, then back at me. "How long?" "Standard protocol for a system like this. 90 seconds. I gasped, my lungs burning. "We have to stay calm for 90 seconds. It was an impossible task. Our bodies were screaming for oxygen, our hearts hammering against our ribs in a desperate, primal rhythm. I could feel my own pulse thundering in my wrist, hot and fast against his skin. "Tell me a story," I said, the words nonsensical, desperate, something quiet. He didn't hesitate. He pulled me a little closer, his voice a low, steady murmur, forcing me to focus on it, to anchor myself to the sound. "When I was 13, he began, his breathing perfectly controlled. I was in a group home. There was a girl, Maya. She was 7. She was terrified of the dark, of everything. He took a slow, measured breath. They had an old mandolin in the rec room, broken string. No one knew how to play it. I found a book, taught myself. Every night, after lights out, I would sneak into the hallway outside her room and play something simple, a lullaby." His voice was different, stripped of the power, of the command. It was softer, warmer. The memory was real, a rare, unguarded piece of him offered up in the darkness. I closed my eyes, picturing it. A teenage boy, alone in a dark hallway, coaxing a gentle melody from a broken instrument for a scared little girl. My own frantic heartbeat began to slow, syncing with the calm, steady rhythm of his story. I felt his pulse, where my fingers rested on his wrist, begin to slow as well, matching mine. A soft click echoed through the chamber. The wall in front of us hissed and slid open. We stumbled out, gasping in the cool, ozone-rich air of the server room. We didn't have time for relief. The room was a nightmare of humming machines and flashing lights. On a large central monitor, a countdown clock was displayed in stark, red numbers 0002 17. Below it, the words, "Seraphim Final Dispersal Initiated." He was scrubbing it all, but not just by deleting it. He was scattering the data, the malicious code, into 1,000 different encrypted nodes across the web. Untraceable, unrecoverable. I lunged for the main console, the titanium key already in my hand. "I need to get in," I yelled. Suddenly, the entire catacomb shuddered. A deep, grinding groan came from above, and pieces of the ancient vaulted ceiling began to rain down dust, mortar, and heavy chunks of stone. Cassian threw himself over me, his body shielding me from the falling debris as I frantically worked to plug the key into the port. A large piece of brick glanced off his shoulder and struck him hard on the temple. He grunted in pain but didn't move, his focus entirely on keeping me safe. A grate in the ceiling above us flew open, and June dropped into the room, landing in a silent crouch. She tossed a small, heavy bag at Cassian's feet. "Gear up," she commanded. As Cassian straightened up, I saw the blood. A dark line was trickling from his temple into his hair, but there was no time. The main door to the crypt slid open, and Mailer Rook stepped inside. He was no longer a voice over a speaker. He was here, his face a mask of triumphant fury. Behind him stood Cade, looking unsteady but menacing, and 4 other men armed with tactical carbines. "The key, Miss Bennett," Rook said, his voice dangerously calm. "Hand it over and I might let your protector live." The room erupted in a deafening cacophony of gunfire. The sound, contained by the stone walls, was a physical blow. June and Cassian returned fire, using the server racks as cover. I dropped to the floor, crawling on my belly through the maze of cables, my heart hammering. My only thought was the console. The countdown clock ticked past 1 minute, 0000:59. Cassian was moving slower now, a slight stagger in his steps. He was shaking his head, trying to clear it. I saw his eyes lose focus for a split second. The blow had been harder than I thought, a concussion, at the very least. I scrambled to his side, pulling a compression bandage from a pocket. Cassian, I pressed it against the wound on his temple. He flinched, his eyes finding mine. They were unfocused, the pupils slightly dilated. "Stay with me," I commanded, my voice sharp, channeling every ounce of authority I had ever used on a patient. My eyes never left Rook. "You are not allowed to sleep." The countdown hit 30 seconds, 0000:30. Rook's men were pinning us down. I had to get back to the console. The final override, but a choice. A terrible one flashed in my mind. Jax had explained it. The soft disarm, which I was about to initiate, would neutralize Seraphim while allowing the legitimate aid systems to continue functioning. But there was a faster way. A hard kill switch. It would be instantaneous, but it would also crash the entire federal network for at least a day. Shipments would stop. Hospitals would wait. People would suffer. The countdown hit 15 seconds, 0000:15. Rook was smiling. He thought he had won. He thought my only choice was to destroy the system to stop him, creating chaos that he could exploit. He was betting on my fear. I made my choice. I chose faith in Jax's design, in myself. I let go of Cassian, pushed myself to my feet, and stood up from behind the server rack. The gunfire stopped. Everyone stared at me. Rook's men raised their weapons, their sights all centering on my chest. I ignored them. I walked calmly, deliberately, to the main console. I took a slow, deep breath. Just as Cassian and I had done in the chamber, I felt my heart rate steady, with a hand that was surprisingly still. I slid the key home and initiated the final, soft disarm protocol. On the screen, the countdown clock froze at 0000:03. The red numbers flashed, turned green, and then dissolved into a single, beautiful word: deactivated. A roar of pure, animalistic rage erupted from Rook. He raised his own handgun, leveled it at my heart, and pulled the trigger. Click! The sound was tiny in the sudden, ringing silence. The loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The hammer fell on an empty chamber. Rook stared at his useless weapon in disbelief. From the shadows near the entrance, June stepped out. "Dummy magazine," she said, her voice laced with ice. "Swapped it out at the gala. You never even noticed." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Cassian's bloody face. He pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly, but his eyes were clear, and his voice was steady. He looked at Rook, who was now surrounded, disarmed, and defeated. "Dessert is served. Rook," he said. As if on cue, the old bells of St. Camille began to chime, their deep bronze tones vibrating through the stone beneath our feet. The sound wasn't one of alarm, but of victory, and it heralded the arrival of the cavalry, though not the kind anyone in this crypt would have expected. The passage that June had dropped from, and the main entrance that Rook had used, were suddenly flooded with light, not the tactical beams of a police unit, but the harsh, indiscriminate glare of news cameras. A group of young, determined people, wearing jackets with a simple, stylized lighthouse logo, swarmed into the catacombs. Jax's Harbor Light volunteers. They weren't armed with weapons, they were armed with live-streaming cell phones, their lenses turning this shadowy underworld into a global stage. Maelor Rook flinched back from the lights like a creature of the dark, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending fury. His power, his entire empire, was built in the shadows, on whispered threats and backroom deals. He couldn't operate in the light. He couldn't turn this into a violent mess. Not when a dozen cameras were broadcasting his every move. A shootout would no longer be a tragic accident. It would be a public execution, with him as the star. The checkmate was delivered not by a bullet, but by a quiet, professionally dressed woman who stepped through the crowd. She handed a data slate to the highest-ranking MIB agent on the scene, who had gone pale with shock. A sealed emergency filing with the Delta Parish Civil Court. Etta Sorrell's voice announced, "Calm and clear, documenting Mr. Rook's conspiracy to subvert federal aid distribution. You'll also find evidence of MIB collusion. The snake has been decapitated at both ends. By the law, not by violence." The fight was over. Rook's men, seeing the situation for what it was, a total, unmitigated defeat, slowly began to lower their weapons. The game was up. From the shadows, Rowe emerged, his face a mess of shame and relief. He took charge, his voice booming with a newfound, desperate authority, directing the legitimate security forces to secure the scene, to preserve the evidence. He was performing his penance. He caught Cassian's eye from across the crypt and gave a single, pleading nod, a silent request for this to be the end of it. Cassian didn't look at his men for counsel. He looked at me. He was asking for my verdict. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He had chosen to use Rowe's life. Now it was time to validate that choice. Cassian gave a curt nod back to Rowe, a silent act of closure. But Rook was not a man who accepted defeat. His empire was crumbling, his reputation in ashes. He was a cornered animal with nothing left to lose, and in his desperation he moved. He was impossibly fast. He lunged, not at Cassian, not at his men, but at me. A cold, sharp line of steel pressed against my throat. Rook's arm was a vice around my chest, pulling me back against him, using my body as his last, pathetic shield. He had found a small, wicked-looking knife from a sheath on his ankle. "Everybody back," he screamed, his voice raw with panic. "Drop your weapons, fail, or she dies right here." The world narrowed to the feeling of that blade against my skin, but there was no panic, not this time. I looked at Cassian. His face was a terrifying, blank mask, but his eyes were a raging storm. Without hesitation, he let his handgun clatter to the stone floor. He raised his hands, palms open, a gesture of complete surrender. "Let her go. Rook," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "This is between you and me." "There is no you and me anymore," Rook shrieked. "There's only this." He pressed the blade harder against my throat, and a thin line of warmth trickled down my neck. Cassian took a slow, deliberate step forward. His eyes never left mine. They were locked on me, a silent, powerful communication. "I am here. I am with you." And I remembered our rule, the anchor in the storm. I started counting in my head. 1, 2, his arm is tight, but there's a gap near my ribs. 3, 4, breathe. Lyra, breathe. Cassian took another step. Rook shuffled backward, pulling me with him. 5, 6, the pressure point on the ulnar nerve, right where his forearm rests on my collarbone. At the count of 7, I acted. I stomped my heel hard, not on his foot, but on the delicate bones of his instep. As he grunted in pain, his grip momentarily loosening, I drove my elbow backward, directly into the gap I had identified. At the same time, I brought my own heel up, kicking back and striking the inside of his knee. It was enough. His balance was compromised for a fraction of a second, but a fraction of a second was all Cassian and June needed. Cassian moved in a blur, not grabbing for the knife, but seizing Rook's wrist in a grip of pure steel, forcing the blade away from my throat. June was there a heartbeat later, her movements precise and brutal, a sharp twist, and the knife was in her hand. Rook was disarmed, exposed, and utterly defeated. No shots were fired. The final battle was won with a paramedic's knowledge of the human body and a bond of absolute trust. Silas stepped forward and cinched a plastic zip tie around Rook's wrists, pushing him face down onto the cold, damp stone of the catacomb floor. There was no cheering, no applause, just the collective, ragged sound of a dozen people letting out a breath they didn't know they'd been holding. The strength that had held me upright finally gave out. My legs began to tremble. Cassian stumbled as he turned to me, the adrenaline that had kept him going finally fading. He was swaying on his feet, his face pale beneath the grime and blood. I caught him, my arms wrapping around his waist, holding him up as he sagged against me. My hands came away sticky with his blood. I looked down at them, then up at his face, and the tears I had held back for so long finally fell. Not tears of fear, not tears of helplessness, tears of survival, tears of a victory bought at a terrible price. Above us, dawn was breaking. We emerged from the tomb into the soft, gray light of a new day. The news was already spreading. Independent media outlets, armed with Edda's data and Jax's Harbor Light graphics, were showing the world the truth. They showed the flow of aid, now corrected, reaching the small, forgotten hospitals. Rook's name, once a symbol of philanthropy, was now synonymous with a monstrous, cold-blooded greed. His empire of lies had crumbled into dust. A reporter's camera found us as we stood there, blinking in the new light. Cassian looked down at me, his hand gently cupping my face, his thumb wiping away a tear. He ignored the cameras, ignored the world, his voice so quiet it was as if he were speaking only to my soul. "Dinner's not over," he murmured, the words a familiar, intimate echo. I looked up at him, a watery smile breaking through the tears. "Until I tell you why I cried." He waited, his gaze full of a deep, patient understanding. "Because I chose not to be helpless anymore," I whispered. In the weeks that followed, a new kind of quiet settled over our lives. Vesper began a painful, necessary restructuring. Cassian, with Edda's expert legal guidance, began the long process of disentangling his legitimate businesses from the dark soil they had grown in, pivoting toward a new focus on supply chain security. He began, slowly and deliberately, to let his old world go, and he anonymously, through a series of shell corporations, became Harbor Light's biggest financial backer. I went back to my ambulance. I needed the familiar rhythm of it, the honesty of saving one life at a time. But a few afternoons a week, I would go to the small office where Jax and his team were changing the world, and I would help coordinate the logistics, my paramedic's sense of triage proving invaluable. My brother, his name finally free, was no longer a ghost to be saved, but a partner to work beside. One evening, months later, the unfinished dinner finally continued. It was at the String House. The table was simple wood, lit by warm, flickering candles. There were no bodyguards in the room, no tension in the air. The only sound was the gentle, soothing patter of rain on the roof. After the meal, Cassian pushed a small, velvet box across the table. My breath caught, my heart, for a foolish moment, leaped, but when I opened it, it wasn't a ring. It was a key, old, ornate, and beautiful. "It's the key to the String House," he said quietly, "to the music room, to this place." It wasn't a claim of ownership. It wasn't a proposal that would try to define us. It was an invitation. It was a grant of access, of trust, of an equal partnership. I stood up, walked around the table, and pulled him to his feet. I rose on my toes and initiated the kiss. It was a slow, deep, and certain kiss, free of desperation and fear. It was a kiss of peace, of arrival. I placed my hands flat on his chest, feeling the calm, steady rhythm of his heart beneath my palms. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closing. "If one day you cry again," "Lyra," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I now understood, "cry on my shoulder." The rain fell, the quiet notes of a distant jazz trumpet drifted through the open window, and the lights of New Orleans glowed with a soft, promising light. Our dinner was finally, truly over. Not because the meal had ended, but because the truth had been spoken, and a new life had just begun. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below to say hello, share your thoughts, and connect with fellow fans. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like and show some extra love by hitting the hype button to help this story reach more listeners.